back, everyone, and from our recess. We are no longer in recess. And I believe as we begin, Councilmember Rice has something.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Last week, when we first had this discussion about compensation, I had brought up the fact that in previous times when we had this difficult discussion about compensation and not funding increases, that the county council needed to take the leadership in doing the same as what we saw our county employees do. I understand that we are constitutionally mandated to receive salaries, but we have worked out a way in which council members actually voluntarily donate back from their paychecks. It was unanimous in the past. When I brought this up last week, I didn't hear a council member object. And so I'd like to propose that we ask staff to draft the proper documentation so that we can continue in that same vein again this year.
I certainly am in agreement. I don't know, is that supposed to be a motion? How does that work?
I'll second if it needs to be, but I don't know if it's a formal motion.
I don't either, but you know, as far as I'm concerned, we can vote, and if it doesn't need to be a formal motion, wouldn't be the first time I've messed up. All those in favor, please raise your hand, and that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Ms. Michelson. And with that, we are going to begin the community grants and MSCG cost sharing, and I'm assuming Mr. Howard, Ms. Chen will begin, please.
Well, if I could just frame it, Mr. Council President, and then we'll turn it over to council staff, if that's okay.
Oh, okay, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I want to thank my co-chair, Councilmember Craig Rice. We had a conversation about this very, very early this morning to talk about this specific issue. And I will frame this and then in a moment or two defer to him to specifically discuss the matter that we'll need to discuss a little bit further with regards to some cost sharing grants within arts-based organizations. But I want to first acknowledge the incredible nonprofit sector and our community-based organizations and arts-based organizations who continue to step up and provide critical functions to county residents. We are blessed and fortunate to have world-class, and I truly mean that, world-class nonprofit organizations here in Montgomery County who often serve as best practices nationally and in fact internationally. We often look out the window to see what people are doing. Well, we need to look no further than right here in Montgomery County to see some outstanding organizations providing innovative and efficient and high quality services to our residents, especially now when they are the most needed. And so, as my colleagues will recall, serendipitously, under the leadership of our GO committee and Council Chairwoman Navarro, the decision was made to begin the process of landing on a grants office here in Montgomery County, which has been sorely needed for quite some time. And as you guys have heard me say before, I have seen this from all angles, as a nonprofit employee, as a contractor, administer through Department of Recreation, and now in the appropriation of funds as a member of the County Council. And while I think the process has been strong and has given rise to so many different organizations, the time has come for us to be strategic for moving forward and creating an office that will help us better leverage outside philanthropy, federal funds, state funds, help better provide administrative support and logistical support as organizations are applying for these funds, but then also helping them ensure administrative and fiscal responsibility as they carry out these programs. I also do want to acknowledge the great work of Carolyn Chen and Josh Waters and the OMB team who, working with our county central staff, were able to meet with literally hundreds of nonprofit organizations over the last year. And again, serendipitously, this council decided even before COVID that in this transition year, we would strive to, our starting point would be providing at least the same amount of resources that organizations received in the previous year, as we transition forward to possibly making some additional adjustments. But in this year, that we would essentially hold these organizations harmless. And again, to the credit of the executive branch, a number of organizations were moved into the base budget, which is something we've been talking about for a long time. And I think will help, particularly those longstanding organizations who've been doing services for decades, will put them in a better position to administer those funds. And so the primary aspects of what you see before you are essentially the same amount of funds that most of these organizations had received in the previous year. Where there is a little bit of a difference is that there was a recommendation within the cost sharing grants in the CIP that at least 4 of those projects be deferred, freeing up some operating dollars that we could access for this year's operating budget. And so when the packet came out on Saturday, we learned on Sunday night that there were some concerns raised by some of those organizations whose budgets were proposed to be deferred, and specific financial concerns and other concerns. And so because we found that out so late on Sunday night, which was also Mother's Day, we wanted to defer that decision, recommended deferral of that decision, so that county central staff could find out more information regarding these organizations about what the respective impact would be to them. Now, there's a lot more to the cost sharing story that for those of my colleagues who were on the previous council know all too well, and decisions that were made and concerns raised about the process that was followed to appropriate those funds to begin with. But you know, for better or worse, those commitments had been made to some of these organizations, and so we wanted to better understand what the impact would be. And so also in a moment or two, you will hear from council central staff who, to their credit, have been able to get a little bit more information that I think we will all benefit from. But before I transition over to my incredible friend, Council Chair Rice, I want to say that in keeping consistent with other challenging decisions that we have made within the operating budget, one of many examples is the funding for our disability community, which we agreed we would come back to until we had a better sense of the fiscal outlook to see how much we could support those organizations, acknowledging the urgency of the timing, acknowledging that this has to be done before July 1st to give these organizations an opportunity to prepare for the upcoming year. We find ourselves in a similar situation here. The unique elements of this, I will state, are that you know, we didn't find out until very late about what some of these potential impacts will be. And so for many of us, we are processing this information for the first time right now. And so given the timing of the processing of that information, but also given the need for us to stay consistent with the process that we have followed, I think, quite appropriately until now, it is likely we're going to need more time than today to process this even further. And to my colleague, Councilmember Rice's point, very early this morning, which I appreciated and respected, there does need to be a broader conversation had so that moving forward, there is a little bit more of a systemic approach in how we appropriate grants like this. But there are legitimate concerns raised by these organizations that we need to discuss, and we will revisit as soon as possible. But with that, I teed it up and turn it over to my colleague, Chairperson Rice, to talk more specifically about the NDA. And after he speaks, we'll defer back to Carolyn and back to Craig to highlight what we may have missed and any other items for discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Even though I didn't hear you, Councilmember Katz, I could read lips.
Councilmember Rice, thank you.
It's okay. Councilmember Albornoz, first and foremost, thank you. Thank you for the ability to have a great dialogue and be able to talk things through. I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Let me just say that when we're talking about our NDA, you teed it up in, to the right level in which there's some frustration that continues to exist in terms of equity in arts funding. It's not something that is lost on Susan Jenkins, who I know is on this call, as well as all our arts organizations throughout Montgomery County. There have been many articles as recent as of this past April that highlight the fact of philanthropic giving continuing to have a racial tinge to them, and it creates challenges. And of course, that philanthropic support is what goes into a lot of these arts organizations. And when we talk about Power to Give and all the leveraging that our Arts and Humanities Council does, that is first and foremost in their minds. And I know that it's a challenge because a lot of folks are used to having things the way that they've always had them. And I understand that. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we're doing the best we can to adhere to the policies and procedures that we feel are incredibly important, which is racial equity and social justice. And so from that perspective, I feel as though when we look at what will happen regarding a motion, I'm not going to do the motion now, Mr. Chair. I want us to go through the packet and go through the information, but something that allows for us to keep our commitment. And we don't want to see any of our arts organizations, that I've said in prior conversations dealing with arts budgets, we don't want to see any of our arts organizations harmed or hurt in any way or minimized in terms of their ability to do what they need to, especially in the face of what we're seeing with this economic recession and how it impacts our arts community. But at the same time, I think that a more holistic approach in terms of us being able to just take a step back and look at everything all together. And I really want to highlight my good friend, Councilmember Glass, who reached out to me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, I want to do something for the arts. I see what New York is doing, and they're doing some great things, and maybe we should take a look at that. Being able to incorporate that all together makes a lot of sense for us. And so that gives us a more holistic approach in terms of everything that we're trying to do to address the arts in our community. And so I think that after a lot of conversation behind the scenes, but involving everyone, I've CC'd you on a couple emails back and forth this morning with staff. I think we've come up with a great place where we've landed in terms of being able to balance what everyone's priorities and needs are. And so with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, and over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the first person on staff, either Mr. Howard or Ms. Jen, like to begin, please?
Hello, it's Carolyn.
Okay, please.
Okay,
we can
great.
hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a very long budget season, and I'm always at the end. So I appreciate all the energy that is going into this today. I'd like to first just note that because the council was so adamant on changing the community grants process 2 years ago, we've actually been able to set up a structure and a methodology that has standed the test of a COVID crisis. And that's hard to say, I have to say. We didn't know this was coming. No one knew this was coming, but because of the hard work of the county executive and the branch and OMB in particular, to be able to get a process down and documented in December, we were able to launch an application process that was the most fair and transparent and equitable that we've seen in years. We can always improve. And that set us up perfectly to be able to withstand the type of stressors that we're going through right now, as you've seen as the other budgets. So it was easy and then not so easy, but we'll figure out what we can do to make sure that we keep this sector viable. Are there any comments you have, Craig? Howard?
No, go ahead. Keep going.
Okay, great. So again, to the credit of the county executive and OMB, the recommendation for the budget that came over held all organizations that have current fiscal year 20 contracts the same or more. And that has never happened in the history of the county. I've only been here 3 years, but in the history of the county, that's never happened. In addition, the other win is that $3.8 million was recommended to move into department budgets. That has also never happened. And so just on those two items, big wins that are really going to help us going forward as we navigate out of the COVID crisis. In addition, In addition, the fiscal year 21 community contracts allow for a continuity of services, no break in service between the fiscal years of June 30th and July 1st. That has also never happened. And I credit Health and Human Services and Procurement and OMB for their help to be able to be on it in December to start preparing contracts, streamlining the contracting process and the documentation so that even through a global pandemic, we're going to get all our contracts signed and ready to go so that services do not break. So that's the third win. And that in itself is just something that I think I just want to take the time to thank everybody who helped to do that. It was a long way coming. And it's really helping us moving forward and providing actually a perfect platform to shift over to our more centralized, streamlined, and efficient process through a grant office. With that said, the recommendation that we came towards in the packet was what we talked about with the council last summer in the GO and HHS committees, which was to look at not only the fiscal year 20 contracts, but to look at their funding levels as they compared from 18, 19, and 20. What's important about that is that because of the inconsistency of funding, it's up and down, it's competitive every single year, no organization knows exactly how much they're going to be getting. And so because of that, we have cuts or we have increases, we have volatile funding levels, which only hurts nonprofit services that are being provided. So as part of the recommendation, actually the only recommendation on top of the county executive's NDA for community grants, fiscal year 20 contracts, is to increase all the contracts to the highest funding level that they have received and been contracted with in the past and last 3 years. That does not necessarily mitigate the fact that some organizations and some services, such as disabilities, as Gabe mentioned, are historically underfunded. And so this is just step one, baby step one, in order to start leveling the playing field for the organizations that apply. In our next, are there any questions on that?
I have none yet.
Okay, great. So we've gone through the base community grants to department-based budgets as well as community grants, and now we're moving on to cost sharing, which has been split up into two categories: cost sharing for community organizations that provide services, health and human services, and also cost sharing / capital grants for arts and humanities organizations. For cost sharing, we have a number of organizations, capital grants going forward that it's important to their infrastructure to be able to provide services, services that we also contract them with. I'm happy to say that we did not need to cut anybody or defer anyone here in the cost sharing grant. So every single non-arts organization in the MCB cost sharing PDF, or to other people, the budget is kept level at the county executive recommendations. These include many organizations and capital projects that are new, that are big, that can be completed in the next 12 months. In addition, and we will talk in more detail about this, I know, in another conversation, but the cost sharing for arts and humanities was also included in this recommendation. This was very tough. You know, the arts and humanities sector has been devastated the most out of anyone we've heard so far in terms of the layoffs and the economic really negative impact of COVID. In that sense, the first recommendation that was made on Saturday to prioritize projects and organizations that had not received funding in capital grants cycle in the past by the county. And in addition, these organizations already had their matching funds. One of them is actually private investment, which I've never seen in our cost sharing analysis in the last 3 years that I've been here. And so the recommendation was to prioritize those. And I know we will be going forward on additional discussion on that as Gabe and Craig deferred to. But I'm done with my part of the summary. Thank you.
You, Mr. Howard.
I don't have a lot to add. I just wanted to note that I prepared a supplement, some additional information based on questions council members had asked that shows up as an additional item on the agenda, and it lays out kind of goes through some of the executive's recommendations as well as the framework for the staff recommendations, as Ms. Chen mentioned, including what the potential deferrals might be in the cost sharing project within the arts and humanities field. Also noted that the approach that was included in the staff recommendation to spread out funding in this project over multiple years is an approach that's often taken in CIP projects, as you all are very aware, but it would be a new approach for this project. And it typically has only been funded in single year increments. And then I just also provided some additional information for council members on different potential funding scenarios to consider.
Very much. Councilmember, go ahead, please. Councilmember Rice, was that you or?
Yeah, go
We
ahead.
have other speakers.
Okay. Yeah. No. Well, what I wanted to do is just ask if we could highlight for some of the, well, actually, you know what? Let me let council members do that, because I was going to ask some particular questions about particular projects and the urgency of those projects that are out there, just so we can level set why it is that we're looking to do this when it comes to capital grants. But let me leave that to some council members to be able to ask some of those questions. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, or you, Mr. President.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just for situational awareness of my colleagues, there are 4 organizations, 3 arts-based and 1 in the health and human services space, who've been recommended for deferral. And my understanding is that there has been communication since Sunday with all 4 of those organizations, 2 indicating that they would obviously prefer not to, but could defer their projects by a year, and 2 who had expressed some concerns. And so if we could start with sharing with my colleagues and I the feedback from those 4 specific organizations whom we've heard from so far, and then from there defer to my colleagues that I know have questions regarding some of the process issues and communication and that sort of thing. So I don't know if Ms. Chen or Mr. Howard, you're in the best position to do that, but if you could describe what you have heard from those organizations, it'd be helpful. Acknowledging again that we will be revisiting this in greater detail a few weeks from now. But I think for purposes of public discussion, it's important to have the beginning part of this conversation today.
Of course. What are the 4 organizations that you're referring to, so I make sure that I'm looking at the right information?
I believe my understanding is Roundhouse, Glen Echo, Olney Theater, and Wider Circle.
Okay, great. Great. I can start with a Wider Circle. A Wider Circle, it was actually fortuitous that I was able to speak to them. But while I was working on the detail for the research for this recommendation, I got a phone call, and I started talking about the capital grants and said, you know what, would you be able to defer? And they generously said they could. They could defer 1 year, $100,000, that would free up some funds in order to alleviate the budget impact this year due to COVID. So that is the update on a Wider Circle. Glen Echo Park as well. This is a project that is very, very dear to me, actually, because I grew up playing at the arcade. The Glen Echo Park was identified by the Capital Grants Review Committee as having very important infrastructural stabilization needs that needed to be done this year. It was a high priority, and it was important that we provided some funding in this year in order for that project to be finished and to be able to commit to the completion of that project as well. Next is Olney Theater. Olney Theater has been working on a very large renovation of a $25 million renovation of their theater. They are already underway. Phase 1, with county and state support and private donations, they will be finished around October, November of this year. Additional funds to be provided for their capital campaign would help greatly. Phase 2. Phase 2 is slated to begin next summer. Cross your fingers, there's no additional COVID delays, but it would allow them to then begin phase 2 and be able to plan in order for the completion of their entire project. Finally, this Roundhouse Theater, they also have a huge capital project that they've just finished up this past year. It is a $14 million project. They're able to get $7 million in private donations and philanthropy, which is awesome. And what this last $250,000 is to complete their county match that is required by their state bond bill, so that they can now go to the state and leverage an additional $1.5 million in order to fund their capital project. So these particular organizations are important to everyone here on the council. We did reach out to them in person / phone Zoom in order to get the most accurate information on the timing of their projects so that we could have that moving forward to make decisions. The important thing to note is that we cannot not support organizations that need capital funds in order to reopen their doors. That's very important in this year. And in the next 12 months, the more that we can support that, the better for the entire economy. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. I yield back to you, Mr. President, or Chairperson Rice, to lead us through the list of people whom I'm sure have questions.
So just very quickly, Mr. President. So with that in line, what I just want to make sure that my colleagues understand is that we're looking at having a joint committee meeting with the Education and Culture Committee, Office of Management and Budget, Department of General Services, and the Arts and Humanity Council, not only to leverage the funds for these organizations, but to also look at the greater context of all of our arts organizations as a whole and what else we can do to continue, as Ms. Chen said at the very end of her comment, open up their doors quickly, as we know they are a part of our economic vitality and our recovery efforts. And so certainly from that perspective, the strategy is to build a comprehensive plan that encompasses these and others to make sure that we're supporting the arts in line with what Councilmember Glass had asked the Education and Culture Committee to do, which is to take a broader look at our arts as a whole and figure out what our rebuilding plan is going to be and how best to support that. So with that, I yield to my colleagues.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate both co-chairs for their thoughtful comments and for a lot of conversations that have taken place over the last couple of days. This is obviously a very stressful environment for all of us to work, a very challenging environment for all of us to work. There's been a huge question of committees and committee of the whole and how everything gets broken up. And in this particular item, the cost sharing grants, some of which are arts and some of which are not, and the community grants were mixed. And that I think caused some confusion as well for a lot of us. And so I just appreciate the collaboration that has been able to take place since, as we try to sort through this unprecedented environment and try to get to the best possible outcomes. I want to express that appreciation as well. I do and have expressed to colleagues some questions about the process and how decisions have been made and what the basis of those decisions are. I think some of those questions still continue, and I look forward to a good opportunity, if it is not going to be today, if we're going to defer this for a few weeks, to be able to flesh those decisions out. I welcome the proactive conversations with the organizations who are most impacted by this and with the executive branch as well, which has taken place since the initial packet was proposed, which I think is really productive and has led to a better basis of understanding for what the true impact of some of these decisions would be, which I think is really important for the council to decide. And I particularly appreciate, I want to get the words right, so I'm looking down at my notes here from Mr. Rice, but the make sure that no organizations are harmed, hurt, or minimized as part of this process. I think to the council's credit, we've undertaken some significant changes to the process. I think there's a lot of very positives to that, but we have maintained, whether it's community grants or arts grants, it has always been our commitment to make sure that we are holding harmless the organizations reactively and making sure this is proactively, and that we're not making retroactive decisions that renege or take away from existing funding existing commitments that have been made either by the county executive or by the council, but that we fix the process and try to come up with a more methodical and holistic process moving forward, which I think is extremely important, very laudable, and I'm committed to working with everybody to try to achieve that. And I hope that, as we have, I think, done a very credible job, a very effective job on the community grants aspect of this process to make sure that happened. I think we need to make sure that we do that in the cost sharing aspect of this. And I think that by deferring it and with the commitments that we've heard today with how this process would proceed, it sounds like that is the approach that we're going to take, which would be consistent with what we've done, which I really do appreciate. I do think, and just wanted to note the comment about from staff about the new approach that was recommended, which is a very important recommendation. I think a very credible recommendation, but one that's a significant policy shift that the council needs to really think through and deliberate. And I think that's really important. This was not the best timing, I think, to be able to thoughtfully think through what the implications of that would be. So I think time could be a really good antidote to that challenge. And I also think that as we consider that of potentially spreading out, that we consider holding harmless to make sure that time and timing of funding does have an impact, and that we make sure that we reflect that in decisions that we make. And I also want to make sure that as we make the determination, if we pursue a multi-year approach moving forward to new project, which I hope is the way that we would go about that, and I think it's a good recommendation, that we have a mechanism, whether it's an MOU or some other commitment that we could make that could signal the commitment from the county in a way that everybody could be held accountable to it. We in the county could be held accountable to it. It could be written so that the executive isn't making commitments if the council doesn't feel part of, or one aspect of government versus another, and the organizations who need to rely on the funding to make significant decisions, particularly related to capital projects, would be able to do so with some level of confidence, obviously pending fiscal constraints, but some level of confidence that we are going to fulfill our commitment as a county to hold them harmless. So I wanted to make sure we made that point. I do have some specific questions about the recommendations, but if it's preferred, I can wait until the full discussion in terms of the methodology and how decisions were made. Some were increased and some were decreased. I think there's some open questions about that, but I think there's probably a better opportunity to do so at the later time as proposed by Mr. Rice. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think it should
I'd
be
like to respond.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. So to the point of Friedson's statement about decreases, there were no decreases to any of the capital grants, so that is incorrect. One thing that is very important to note about the review of the capital grant process since the beginning, we started in October on this and worked with the CIP team in order to align the cost sharing process with our much larger CIP budget. And the idea actually was to be able to understand how projects are actually budgeted over 6 years versus in the cost sharing. In the cost sharing budget is that it's an annual process, which means a large capital process, large capital projects such as Olney Theater, which is many years long, would need to keep applying competitively every year. So I think this move to shift. And while this was made last week to be able to shift our cost sharing capital projects into a multi-year process is smart, and also allows for effective planning by an organization to take on significant changes in construction that would allow their facilities to continue to be economic drivers for them. So in addition to the multi-year process that I know we'll be talking about in the E&C committee, I also just wanted to be comprehensive and add that the two other organizations were not noted. Actually, yes, two. Sandy Spring Museum, as well as Montgomery Community Television. I'd just like to be able to make for the record so that they're not left out of this discussion. Sandy Spring Museum also has a state bond bill that they will be able to match if funding was given to them, and they would be able to, they were a very high priority in order to get infrastructure changes fixed this year. In addition, Montgomery Community Television, they have a very quick project that would be able to be finished in 3 months if they were able to receive full funding. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson, did you have something in addition?
I just wanted to say that we are going to have a more in-depth conversation about this, and so I don't think it's appropriate for us to jump into any of the kinds of back and forth. It's really important for us to stick to the fact that we're moving forward with a great way for us to have a robust conversation around this in the context. And I also want to extend and make sure that I've got an extension of invitation to any council member who's interested in wanting to weigh in as well as ask questions. We will have an opportunity to delve into this and get to the very bottom of all of the dynamics that are involved in the decision-making process, how it should be from here moving out, as well as the salient points that need to happen. So I just wanted to put that out there, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson, did you want to jump back in for a moment? Or
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm not interested in getting into a back and forth. I think there's a number of outstanding questions that there's a more appropriate time to answer them. I was just raising the conversation I think should be had. That was the premise behind this conversation. I think there'll be a far more appropriate time and manner in which to raise those points, and I will wait for the more appropriate time.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Ms. Chen and also OMB for, working very diligently to assist in this transition. It's not an easy thing. We've been trying to do this for a very long time. We're not necessarily there completely, but there's no doubt that part of the back and forth that we've had to engage in with the cost sharing is a reflection on the fact that things have been done in a certain way for a very long time. And what we're trying to do now is to move things into a direction where there could be more predictability, more transparency, and more equity. And so those are, big goals. And I think that, regardless of the pandemic and everything, I believe staff has done an amazing job. I think Ms. Chen has done an incredible job in getting us to this particular point. I do agree that we need to spend some time in committee, and there are a number of structures, because I know that the GO and HHS have been working on the issue of the grants office. I know under my presidency, I proposed that arts and humanities go under education and culture, so there is that piece there. So however we're able to hold these conversations, I think that all pertinent members of those committees should have a role in how we then move forward and how we best perfect the process. But again, I want to underscore that this has never been easy, and I think that what we've done is to push ahead. And I have to give a shout out to Councilmember Leventhal, who really we worked so hard to get some of these steps in place, and now we're very close. So I just have to give that shout out to staff, because I know it has been difficult, but they've definitely, I think, achieved quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass. You are on mute. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And I too want to thank all the staff and volunteers who worked on all these grant applications. I know particularly for all the volunteers who do scores and scores of interviews and do their homework in preparation for those interviews. I appreciate it, and I know we all appreciate their hard work, which is manifests itself in this review document. And as has just been said, change is hard. The grant process needed to be updated. And I say that as someone who has gone through it on the user end as a former executive director of a nonprofit. And I know that many of my former colleagues, those running our incredible organizations, agree with that sentiment as well, that updating is a good thing. And sometimes when we set out on a course for change, the way we envision it might need to be refined. And I think maybe that's what we've found in this instance. And, I think that there is a lot of merit into a multi-year funding system for capital programs, just like we have the CIP program, because I can tell you, as someone who has applied for capital grants and who, before joining the council, completed a capital program for an arts and humanities group, having the ability to ask for funding and know what funding is available years out is very helpful. The predictability is important. And so I think there still is room for refinement, but this is the process that we currently have. And so conversations have ensued. And the last thing I just want to say is, with regard to the comments that the ENC chair, Mr. Rice, mentioned about the arts programs and arts organizations here in Montgomery County. Back in March, I reached out to a number of arts groups in preparation for events I was planning on hosting in June for Pride Month. We, last year, in the inaugural activities of hosting Pride Month, we went to a bunch of arts groups and had events at their facilities. And so in March, we started those conversations. The last week in March, when it was the first week of the stay-at-home orders, one of the arts groups called back and said, we're not going to be able to host your event anymore because we've had to furlough 60% of our staff. And that was in March. And so today we're having a lot of conversations about employment and about security and about providing for everybody in our community. But it was that conversation way back in March that I knew we would have to do something specifically for our arts groups that really have no other funding. There's no place else for them to turn to. And so when I started seeing some best practices from jurisdictions around the country, namely New York, I immediately reached out to Chair Rice and said, we need to do something, because if not us, nobody else is going to be doing this. And so I look forward to working with him and everybody in this sector and all of my colleagues as well, that as we continue trying to do right and protect everybody in our community, we do that for the arts and humanities organizations as well.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. Good discussion. I'm sure Ms. Chen meant to refer to my colleague as Mr. Friedson. I know this kind of inadvertent word slips happen. I just think it's important for us to ensure that we're adding as much as possible. We don't need to take away from anyone. We just need to add as much as we can. So that's just been my general perspective. To the extent that organizations have the ability to, postpone a county investment, that is incredibly appreciated. And this year we may have very little funds to add to groups. So the fact that some can step up and help others get through means a lot. And then, I'm glad we're going to postpone this for a future date in order to drill down and just make sure that everyone, no one nonprofit is having to lay off employees to help another. But we'll figure out how to make this a win-win for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. That is all the speakers that I have. So, Councilmember Rice, are you? Yeah.
Yes, sir. So I have a motion to shift $303,749 from cost sharing, the capital and arts capital budget, which is all current revenue, to fund FY21 community grants contracts not moved into department-based budgets. This allows the council to fund the $616,000 above the county executive's FY21 recommendation for the community grants that aren't in the base budget to all contracts at their highest funding level in the last 3 years, which you heard from Ms. Chen. And the purpose is to make sure that we're equitably funding those grant contracts. So the first one is the shift of the $303,749 from the cost sharing to fund the community grants. The second part of the motion is to defer the discussion on capital grants to the Arts and Humanities organizations to the Education and Culture Committee, jointly with Office of Management and Budget, Department of General Services, and the Arts and Humanities Council. And I know that we have Ms. Jenkins on the line as well. There are two outcomes that we're requiring as a part of that. One, we want to review the fiscal impact of COVID to arts organizations and reassess all needs for capital projects with a focus on economic stimulus, I know which Councilmember Friedson will like, and long-term stability and vitality of the arts and humanities sector in Montgomery County. And our Education and Culture Committee will meet in the next 3 weeks and present a recommendation back to the council for a supplemental appropriation at that time. So that is my motion with dates certain, so that we don't have any of our partners waiting, and we have a robust and comprehensive plan on how to move forward. And I'd like to move that at this time.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Albornoz.
I'll second, and then I have a question for staff.
Please, you
Thank you. So I know there's been discussion about when committees are going to start convening again. And I know all of us are pushing for that to happen as soon as possible. Same is true in HHS, same is true in public safety, Fed. Everybody's got a backload of stuff we've got to talk about, and we have to do some of it sooner rather than others. I just want to ask Central Staff, maybe Marlene or Craig, what is the plan to get us back together as committees, and how quickly are we planning on doing that?
We were hoping that the start of committees could coincide with when it is safe for our staff to come back to the office, but we are recognizing that if the requirement to telework continues, we will find a way to have remote committees and have those continue after the council's budget recess. And again, try not to have staff be in the office every single day. If the word from top management is that we should be trying to telecommute, but we will figure out a way to get committee meetings started again.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Michelson. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you for that. I just wanted clarification from staff. We started to talk about this yesterday, but should some or all of the $303,000, which is basically being diverted from the capital grants to the community grants in order to fulfill the holding harmless for the past 3 years of funding, should that funding come out of reserves through a supplemental appropriation, would we still be at or above 10% reserves?
Yes, you'd still be at or above 10% reserves.
Okay, thank you. That was the point of clarification I was looking for. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to make sure I understand the motion. If I heard it right, Councilmember Rice, it was in part to take the staff recommendation, part of the staff recommendation, and then defer other parts. Is that correct? Okay.
That is correct, sir. Yep.
And that was literally 2 thumbs up right there. And Mary Beck would like to speak. Ms. Beck?
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I just guess I have a question. I just want to make sure that I understand what the number is on the PDF for FY21. We're not zeroing out the arts facility grants at this point. I just want to know how the number is changing on the PDF, or are we just reallocating within the total of the PDF?
You mean from cost sharing to community grants, or for between the arts to cost sharing? Are you talking about the cost PDF?
Well, there are community grants within the cost sharing PDF, and so that's what I'm trying to understand. Or are we moving money out to the NDA in the operating budget?
It's actually both, and I can work with you on figuring out what that is. It's that there's $200,000 for that of non-grants, capital grants that are in the capital grants. So it's part of that, and then there's about like $111,000 that would be shifting from arts cost sharing to community grants.
Okay, and we'll work out the technicalities of how we display the grantee list on the approved PDF for next week.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Councilmember Friedson, please.
Yeah, sorry, I just realized one other question. Thank you, Ms. Beck, for raising that. How will the community grants based on this motion will be reflected in the approved budget by item as they traditionally are and amount to reflect this? How will the cost sharing grants be reflected formally in the budget if we are putting a placeholder? Will it just be no listed organizations for now and one bulk amount and a line item for that, and then the work of the committee or joint committees or whoever is taking this up, and then full council, final decisions made, and if any supplemental requirements are required, we would take that up at that point and then come up with that list in that capacity? I just wanted some clarity there.
So what you're suggesting makes sense to me, that we would take out the specific named organizations and
That's
have
correct.
a placeholder and say we would return for that.
That is correct. That is my understanding as well, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I now have no other speakers. We have a motion by Councilmember Rice, seconded by Councilmember Albernaz. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Next, we have, just hold on here, we need a motion for a proposed closed session to consult with counsel, to obtain legal advice, and to consult with staff, consultants, or other individuals about pending or potential litigation pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3-305, subsection B, 7, and 8. The topic is a pending suit against Montgomery County. Is there a motion?
So moved. Oh, sorry.
Who was the first so moved?
It was Tom.
So moved was Councilmember Reamer. Second was Councilmember Albernaz.
Right.
You were a close second, but you came in second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. We are adjourned this meeting, and we are going to our closed session.
Siete tres dos dos uno.
240-777.
3221.
32